we define it? In some ways, and this is potentially really worth addressing, it's almost perceived to be part of the experience that every child will have. And when we are talking about bullying and its most pervasive effects, how do you define it? There are behaviours along a continuum, I guess. And what are you talking about in terms of bullying in the school environment?
Yeah, when we start seeing bullying impact mental health, we're looking at the repetitiveness of it becomes a factor. It also would be deemed obviously an unreasonable behaviour in that situation. So we've kind of seen a movement in how bullying's happened over the last 10 years. So like you touched on, it used to just kind of be thought this is just what happens to us when we're young people. You know, it's part of growing up. But over the decades, we've realised the harm that actually is caused by bullying. And we've seen a shift in the way that bullying happens. So it's kind of gone from more of that physical kind of threatening behaviour to more kind of psychologically based. So we start to see things like threats of exclusion, that friendship manipulation. We've got a bit of a screenshot culture where, young people are taking a screenshot and then sending it out to other students or putting it online. People being filmed without their consent. And one that's quite prevalent in New Zealand are kind of those jokes that we kind of try to pass off as banter, but we're actually using them to humiliate someone else. And then when we see that repetitively, it can cause really serious harm to people in the form of the impact on their mental health.
Typically different issues to deal with at different ages. As you say, young children might use the old standover tactics, I want this, I'm having this, right? But at what point do you start to see these sometimes nefarious or sometimes harder to really isolate aspects of bullying?
Yeah, there's definitely a human development perspective to this. So when you've got young children, like if we're looking at kind of primary, intermediate, school-age children, it tends to be quite behavioural in that they're learning how to be friends, they're learning how to make good friendships, they're learning how to communicate with each other, and there's often not the intent to hurt someone, but it's more relational in that they might be excluding people from certain things because they don't like something they've done, or, it might become physical and pushing and things like that. So at that younger age in primary schools, the earlier we can kind of intervene in those and teach them the skills to be good friends and accept other people and the diversity that they see around them, then we tend to be able to stop those behaviours and there's less harm caused from them. The age that it becomes more impactful is really around those early adolescent years. And it's interesting because obviously at that time, adolescents aren't made to make great decisions and they don't always have the experience or the ability to kind of weigh up the consequences of their behaviour. The other thing that's particularly happening at that adolescent stage is that belonging is everything. So friendships and their peer relationships become the most important part of their lives, which we want them to do. So they're slowly moving away from, the adults being the main people.
We're joined by All White's head coach Dan Paisley and All White's assistant coach Tony Reddings after we announced the squad for the FIFA World Cup about half an hour ago. So I'll kick off on the question standard, and then I'll hand over to you guys to ask any questions you might want to ask. Cameras all good? Everyone's rolling, all that kind of stuff? Okay, perfect. Baze, obviously just announced your squad. How good is it to have that out in the wild? It's something you've been working on for the past number of months.
It's a date that we knew was coming. Obviously, the last 3 years we were building up to qualifying, and then we've been building up to the World Cup. And this date was in place around naming of the squad, and we knew it was such a big moment for us, but also for the number of players that we've been tracking and monitoring over the last 3 years. It's a massive achievement to be selected, but a massive disappointment, for those guys that are not selected. So, yeah, it's good to finally get there, and we can now move on and we can move forward, preparing for our pre-World Cup environment.
Awesome. Over to you guys.
Darren, can you just talk us through, the process, first of all, of you and your coaches sitting down to finalise this 26, and when did you communicate selections and to players and how?
Yeah, I mean, so it goes back a long time, probably 3 years. The constant monitoring and tracking of all of our players, eligible players, through not just me, but Tony, Simon Elliott, and our other staff, Goffey, even Logan, our analyst, constantly checking on the players, and then we select a lot of squads through the years, and we're able to work with them, and monitor them within us, within our environment as well. But I suppose the closer it got, the last few weeks has been a lot of conversations with the selection panel. So we do have a selection criteria that the players all know. They've all been sent that 6 months ago around selection for any window. But also, then myself, Tony, Simon and Goffey, we sit and go through the process pretty thoroughly. We talk about every player, every position, start to look at the balance of the squad. Everybody does like an independent selection. And then it all comes to me, and we put it all together in a sort of one final package, and see if we're all aligned on our opinions and decisions. And then we have a lot of discussions on the ones that maybe we're not so clear on before we finally land on the final 26. And there's a lot of things that go into the makeup of that 26.
You've included Tommy Smith in your 26. He hasn't played for the All Whites since September 2024. He's just been playing at Braintree Town and playing in the 5th tier in England. You've got centre backs who aren't in the squad who have been playing at high levels. What is it that makes including Tommy Smith in this group so important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the squad of 26, we do have that room. I think most of the squads at the World Cup will be selecting a few players within that 26 that maybe add something a little bit different. We always want to select the strongest squad that we can. We need 2 players in every single position as a starting block. 2 players that could start, or a player that could start and a player that could come on and replace if injured. So that gives you sort of 22, and then you take another keeper, there's 23. And then you're left with 3 more to add. And, we look at which players add some utility, flexibility positionally. And someone like Lockie Bayliss is pretty flexible. He can play anywhere across midfield, he can play 6, has played fullback. So he adds a little bit different to maybe an Owen Parker-Price or a Cam Howson in that midfield sort of type of area. We wanted to take an extra forward. So, we ended up with Woodsy, Costa and Ben Waine as those centre forwards. And then we are left with, okay, where else do we see gaps? We didn't feel like we had a major gap, but we know that, part of the selection criteria is, do you add value off the pitch? Do you add to the culture, to the leadership? And Tommy's the best at that. He's a bit of a cultural architect. He's been doing that role for a number of years, for us, and is very experienced in that. Plus we have another player that's been to a World Cup. That gives us 2 players, Woodsy and Tommy, that have the experience of previously playing at a World Cup. Simon Elliott, Roland Jeffrey, a staff that have been to a World Cup, and the rest of us haven't. So that's an added benefit that Tommy has. But we know, he'll also take a lot of weight off of the other leaders, Woodsy, Marco, Joe Bell, Boxy, those guys that may be really, really concentrating on performing and playing, starting maybe. Tommy, he's there as a player. He needs to be ready, and he will be. But he does add extra value. And I think he's the only player I know that potentially could really impact the performance from not playing. And I've said that to him at times, and that's not being disrespectful to him as a player, but he has a way of helping the players that are playing or the players that are coming on as a sub, getting ready mentally and physically, preparing to go and perform.
Yeah. So the last one for me for now, just talking to fans, out there, it's pretty widespread sort of, unable to sort of comprehend why you take someone who wouldn't necessarily be looking to play. A lot of suggestions that perhaps he could be taken, as a member of the staff. Is that something you considered? I guess why would, do you feel it's so strong to use a position on someone who might not necessarily be a player?
It's something we talked about. It was a consideration. Does he become staff? I think with the panel, what we ended up discussing and what we decided was if we did that, it actually takes away the reason that we actually need him there, being part of the playing group and being, the players would look upon him differently if he, ended up putting a blue shirt on. we would treat him differently, and it would have a different vibe, a different impact, I think. So, yeah, I mean, we have to remember Tommy's a very good player. He went back to England for family reasons. Last year he was a very good player for Auckland, and they won the league, and he's super important there. The fifth tier in England is very strong. There's a lot of good clubs in there, a lot of good players. They're professional players. Yeah.
How, just to continue the subject, how tough is this on Bill Tuiloma, considering what he's given to the All Whites cause over the years since 2013? And I guess it could be argued he could also provide that culture and that leadership given his status.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's tough on Bill. Bill's a very good player. Hasn't played a lot of football over the last 3 years, and when he's been involved with us, he's played right back. So when we're looking at that, composition of the squad, and who's in competition with who, we looked at Bill, not really in competition as a right back now because he decided he wanted to be a centre back. Obviously, he has played right back, but so is Tyler Bindon, and so we've gone with 2 right backs with Tyler, knowing that if we needed Tyler to play there. And then he comes into competition with the centre backs, and that puts him in against Finn Sermon, Michael Boxall, Tyler Bindon, and Nando, and Tommy. But like I say, there's some different reasons, and I think it's only if you're in the environment you do realise who affects what, and Tommy is different to Bill. A different player, but a different person off the pitch as well. Yeah, I wouldn't say there's that comparison in regards to what they could bring off the pitch.
And the money side of it, the 250,000, did that make the decision a bit harder as well?
It adds a layer, a pretty big layer, in regards to the decision. Not only, it's every player's dream to play at a World Cup, including mine. Everybody wants to play at a World Cup. So not only are you taking away that opportunity to play in the biggest event in the world, some of the money figures that people are talking about is pretty high. And adds an extra layer. I'm pretty sure players, that wasn't their first thought of I've lost money. They just really wanted to be there and help the team.
And can you take us through the third goalkeeper decision?
Yeah. I mean, we're very lucky with the group of goalkeepers that we have. We've obviously got Crocombe and Poulsen doing very well, that picked themselves, if I'm honest, fighting for that number 1 spot. And then behind them, we've got a good group. And unfortunately, Ollie Sale was the only one, not available to be selected. And then we're left with Nick Zanev, Michael Veld, Henry Gray and Kay Sims. And they're all very good, and they've all been with us at some stage in the last 12 months in a camp. So we were pretty tactical, I suppose, of selections, making sure that we involved all of them at some stage to see how they were within the camp. I mean, with our conversations with the selection panel, we decided that the number 3 goalkeeper, we went with experience rather than youth, because we've got the 2 and the 2, if you know what I mean, Henry and Case in that young sort of mould, forging careers. We decided to go with an experienced number 3, which left us with Nick and Michael. And Michael's currently playing, doing really well. Nick's not played so much this season. It's not all about that. Michael was with us in March and did a great job off the pitch, and helping the guys, and has obviously had a lot of experience helping Poulsen, as an understudy for him. So I think it was close. They're both very good. In fact, all 4 of them are very good goalkeepers. And, when you get down to those sort of decisions, it is challenging. I think most people in the country can get to 22 pretty easily, pretty quickly, maybe. And then everybody picks those last few. But I think what people have to remember is that it's easy picking players, but if you don't have to then talk to everybody else, then you can be, I suppose, quite flippant and say, I would pick him and I would pick him. But we have to go through that process and go, okay, let's pick him, but we need to understand, what are we going to say? What are our reasonings to these players that we're not selecting? We need to be clear about that whole process, which is a little bit longer process for us.
Michael Veld plays here in Auckland, trains right in front of your offices. Is there some sort of disadvantage in a way to Nick Zanev? Obviously, he's not in front of your eyes, and you can see Veld's form in person.
I mean, yes, it's yes and no. I mean, the reality is Michael's played pretty much all season, and Nick's not played very much football this year. We know Nick brings good things off the pitch. So that's that number 3 position. It's not just about playing. There's a lot of considerations for every player, really, for every position. But that number 3 one, it is a mix of. I won't say the decision was because he was playing and he wasn't. It was part of the decision. I think they're both very good golfers and they're both very close. They're both very good in the group and in the environment. And I suppose Michael has the edge of he is currently in form and currently playing. It's not really about where he lives or where he trains, even though we do obviously see him in the A-League.
Those tougher calls you had to make, I suppose, how long ago did you have to do those, and what was the players' reactions? Bill Tuiloma, Andre de Jong, the likes.
I mean, we've a selection panel. We've been talking about this for probably 3 weeks now, knowing the date was there, and then I've spent the last 7 days gradually speaking to all the selected and non-selected players. And that finished yesterday when myself and Tony went down to Wellington and watched them training, because they're still training down at the Phoenix, the whole group, and we had meetings with all of those players that were on our sort of provisional list face to face. And yeah, that was probably the toughest conversation. We've known Bill a long time. We know his family. He's a very good player. He has been involved with the All Whites a long time. So that was a tough conversation. That was difficult.
Was there any temptation to bring along a teenager like Luke Brooksmith just for experience at a big tournament like this?
Yes. We did talk about that and had a good conversation with Luke yesterday. At some stages along the year, maybe that was a possibility and a thought that we had. He could be that exciting young player, and he probably just hasn't played enough football this year for whatever reason. But you look at his form in that very last game, where he came on second half against MacArthur, and I thought he was outstanding and showed glimpses of what he could bring. That brought him back into our conversations a little bit, those last couple of performances. And yeah, it was something that we did look at. Every time you bring somebody in, you drop somebody out. And that's the balance that we have to go through to make sure that we are clear with why we're picking a 26.
And just last one from me, both Libby Kakache and Francis de Vries obviously coming off injuries. Have you spoken to those guys, and I suppose how's their health looking forward to the World Cup? Are you confident that you've got enough support there?
Yeah, I mean, they're both fit, they're both training, or they were. Libby's finished now, but he trained the last few weeks at his club, was on the bench in the championship. Didn't get game minutes, which was a shame for him. Obviously, Franny came on at the weekend. I think he's fit to play this weekend in their big game, or tomorrow. Not ideal that they've both been recently injured. I think where we're comfortable is that we have Ben Old, who's played all season at left back in Ligue 2, which is a high level, and obviously played for us against Chile at left back. And that probably gave us. We were comfortable knowing that we've got a couple of left backs in Libby and Franny that maybe haven't got as much game time. We're still a month away from Iran, so we know they're, and we seek medical advice as well, and the medical advice is all of these players are going to be fit and available for Iran, but we do have that backup option.
You obviously want to go deep into the tournament to look around like those injuries. Is there any concern about fitness or the risk of players, I guess, getting injured and having cover as you go deeper into the tournament?
Yes, but with a squad of 26, I'd like to think that we can cover, losing a couple of players if that happened. Hopefully it doesn't. You can replace players up to the start if anything was to happen before the start of the World Cup. But yeah, with 26, we've got so many players that are so flexible positionally, that could move into a different position if really needed. So, I mean, hopefully we go really deep in the tournament. And hopefully we get those challenges, and I'm sure if we're playing in a knockout game, anybody that we call upon is going to be ready to go and perform and do their job.
Is there a bit more expectation on this group than there would have been 2010 or 1982?
I think so. The last group, 2010, went unbeaten, and that set the standard almost of what you can do as a New Zealand team playing at the World Cup. And that's the challenge we've been talking about for 3 years. Can we do better than that? Can we go one further? Can we win again? Can we get out of the group? I mean, the expectation is there. I think everybody needs to understand it's a challenge. We're the lowest ranked team at the tournament. I think we're probably going to be still a bit of a surprise package, because I think we all know when we watch our team, when everybody's fit and everybody performs well, we've had moments in most games we've played in the last 2 years where we've been pretty competitive, and we know, we can play against teams like Norway, and Chile and other teams, and Côte d'Ivoire, the games away in USA, where we've got a draw, but beating Côte d'Ivoire, beating Chile has given people that experience of being able to win against good teams.
Tony, just to throw into you. You've been involved in selecting World Cup squads before,
Mhm.
the football firms. I don't think I'm disrespecting anyone by saying, you never left out players of the level of, say, a Bill Tuiloma or a Logan Rogerson when you've been doing those squads. What's it been like having, the most competitive, probably New Zealand national team, any level selection process of all time? How's that been different?
I think, if you're talking about those players, maybe they're playing professionally and they're established all whites or established professional players. But I guess when no matter who you're talking to, whether it's Women's World Cup, whether it's an age group World Cup, which we both have experience in, is to those players, it means the same. So even if you are a Bill Tuiloma or a Logan, and it's obviously heartbreaking for them to make the squad, but if you're an amateur player and you think you might be able to make the squad, it's still heartbreaking. It still means the same. I guess, for us, a lot of these conversations or the decisions were harder because we do have a greater depth of players to choose from. But I think in terms of, just like basically explained the process we went through was thorough. So we're confident that we've made the decisions based on the best information that we can. But I would just say, so it's always difficult telling players they're not in the squad because, everyone can see them on the TV that they're good players, but they're good people as well. So that makes those conversations hard. And I would say, no harder or easier, because for those people, when you're hearing it, it still is a devastating piece of news to hear, regardless of your status as a player.
Darren, just two final ones from me for you. Just first of all, Lachlan Bayliss only debuted in March, so it's the closest thing you've got to a bolter. What made you go for him? I would assume Ron Parker Price was perhaps the closest to the competition to him for midfield. And what was it like, you talked about the tough conversations, what was it like having that, I guess, pretty exciting conversation?
Yeah, I mean, we've known Bayliss a number of years. We took him to the Olympics 2 years ago, and he was great in that environment and performed pretty well. So I think he started 2 games at the Olympics and played well for us. So he's one we've been tracking and monitoring along the way. And we challenged him a couple of years ago. The next step is the All Whites. To do that, to be selected, you have to go and perform for your club. And perform at a high level. It's not just about playing, now it's about playing and playing well and impacting the game. And I think everybody can see the season him and Newcastle have had has been amazing, and he's really impacted results, scored goals, assists, player in games, and played really well. And he was rewarded with the call-up in March and came into the camp and integrated really well. He's a great lad. He was really positive around the group, and I think potentially what he gives us different to Owen is that flexibility positionally. He can play 6, he can play 7, 10, 11. He has played right back, but he's probably a bit more of a forward player than an Owen. Has impacted games and scored goals. So, he's a bit of a bolter, but I wouldn't call him that because we feel like we've known him a long time. But he's probably the newest member of the squad.
And how was it breaking the news, John?
Yeah, it was good. That was a nice conversation. The players I think they all have this hope of getting the conversation that goes a certain way. So, when it does, it was a nice conversation with him.
You've selected a lot of squads. Is including Tommy for the reason you're including him the boldest call you ever made?
We don't see it that way. For us, Tommy adds value. Real value. When you look back at previous World Cup squads, 2010, only 15 players played in their squad, actually played, and in 82, the same, 15. So there's only been 30 players that have played at a World Cup for New Zealand. With us, with a squad of 26, and I think there'll be more than 15 players play this time. The number of subs has changed. But we're still going to potentially have 7, 8 players that don't play at this World Cup, which is hard. It's going to be hard for them in a long period. So, that gives us a little bit of room in a bigger squad to have players. I don't see it as a bold decision bringing Tommy out. We see Tommy as pretty vital to ensuring that our environment is the best it can be at all times, whether that's the starting 11, the subs coming on, or those players that potentially are going to be not so happy not playing.
Tony, what's your view as someone on the selection panel about the Tommy Smith scenario?
Yeah, I'll just probably reiterate what Bay said. For us, it's not such a bold decision. It's like quite a simple one in some ways. We know that people will have perception that he's not playing at the same level as some of the others, but when we see him in the environment, he makes other players better. So we've got good centre backs in our team. We've got Michael Boxall. We have a couple of younger ones with Finn, Tyler, and he plays a big mentor role for them, and he has done as they've come through their journey with the All Whites. So I think we want to put our best team on the pitch, and with Tommy in the environment, he makes other players better. So ultimately for us, he's an important part of our team, but he is still a good player. So when he's in and around the environment on the training pitch, he's always talking to players, and it's something that you can only really do if you're on the pitch. When we're doing our set plays, it's the little bits of detail that he's got from all the experience he's got just adds. So it makes us better as a collective, but he makes the individuals better as well. So I would just reiterate what Bay said. I think we're a stronger squad with Tommy in it.
And Darren, when did you finally settle on this squad? Was it sort of Saturday, Sunday, and where were you? Were you at home watching TV, having a coffee with your family, or what was the moment?
No, I mean, it would have been in the meeting with Tony, Simon and Goffey, which was, what day is it today? God, it was last week. It was probably last Friday, where that was finally decided. That's the final squad, which allowed me enough time to start talking to players.
Sorry, just last quick question. Just under 2 weeks now until you're jetting on that plane. What does that final bit of preparation look like? Conversations with players? Are you talking to them about taking special mementos, or what are you actually doing in that time to, I guess, prepare them for everything that's ahead? And on that note, just the unknowns with respect, obviously, trying to keep politics out of sport. There's a really interesting first game coming up for you guys. What does the preparation look like?
I mean, we've been prepping for the oppositions for a number of months already, and between Tony and Logan, our analyst, have been looking at all those teams. So the opposition analysis is sort of not completed because it's always ongoing, but we're pretty far down the track with that. In regards to what are we doing preparing, it's actually a really challenging period at the moment because we've got players that are still playing. In regards to MLS players, Premier League players, some players in Europe constantly play all the way through till almost the 25th of May. We've got players here in the A-League with Auckland and Newcastle that are in playoffs, and we don't know if they're going to go through to the final or not, which has an implication on will they be training. And then we've got a group of players that finished 2 weeks ago, in Marco Stamanic, Libby Kakache, Matt Garbett, Ben Wayne, those guys where their leagues finished and their clubs finished training. So we've been doing a lot of work, and our S&C department doing a lot of work around how are those players keeping themselves fit and ready to come into camp, ready to play. We can't have players that haven't trained for a month, coming into a World Cup. So a lot of work being done behind the scenes on an individual basis. We do have a group going across to America early. I'll be going on Wednesday, and some of those players that are not currently training with their clubs will start in a pre-assembly training block in Miami before everybody comes into camp in North Florida for the 27th. So it's a bit of a stepped process. We're just having to really work on an individual basis of making sure players are ready to come into camp and ready to play against Haiti, England. But mostly everything is prepping towards playing Iran on the 15th.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. We'll call it there. Cheers, Bays. Cheers,
Cool.
Tony.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, I said one question.
Yeah, that's good.